There's a moment just prior to the Battle of Helm's Deep where King Theoden of Rohan laments the situation his people have found themselves within.
The days have gone down in the west, behind the hills, into shadow. How did it come to this?
And I found myself asking that same question. How did it come to this? How is it that against the Uruk-hai of Isengard or the Orcs of Mordor, humanity has found itself on the brink of extinction? Now, I must acknowledge my own biases here. I am a human supremacist, but when we look at the characteristics of Rohan and Gondor and the other major human kingdoms, something just feels a little off here. And this feeling I have isn't isolated to Middle-earth. The Kingdom of Kryta in Tyria, the Kingdom of Stormwind in Azeroth, the Kingdom of Ferelden and Thedas. It took me a bit to put my finger on it, but the humans that make up these nations, well, I'm not entirely sure they're humans. They certainly don't act like those of our world. The differences are usually subtle, and they can vary in their extent from alternate world to alternate world. But generally, these humans seem to be less aggressive, less militaristic, less ambitious, savage, and cruel. They are capable of great violence and war, but usually only in the defense of others or for some higher, more noble purpose. Bigotry, sexism, intolerance, religious strife, these elements might still be present, but they seem tamer and less destructive on human society as a whole. It's like someone kind of smoothed over the rougher edges of the human experience. There are exceptions to this, of course. The human kingdoms and empires of Westeros, the Empire of Man within the Old World, these certainly come to mind. But for the most part, the humans in what we might consider fantasy worlds just seem to act better than you might expect them to. Now, if the humans of our world acted like this, it would be hard not to see it as a badly needed miracle. But the problem is, these more enlightened, kinder, more tolerant humans, they don't have the luxury of living in our modern world. In fact, most of the time, they exist in a much darker and dangerous one. A world in which they're not the only sentient species fighting for dominance. And if you're forced to compete with orcs, goblins, the Char, well, that's a scenario in which having the more savage and cruel elements of human nature on your side might not be a bad thing. It feels strange to argue in favor of this, but if Rohan or any of these fantasy kingdoms had reacted to the mere existence of orcs in the same manner that any powerful kingdom from our world would have, with blind, fanatical hatred, calls for extermination in the name of God, and ruthless military campaigns against them, no matter how little threat they posed, well, maybe in the long run, Rohan would have been better off. I guess my point is, if that army of Uruk-hai bound for Helm's Deep, if they found themselves rerouted to our world, and were forced to fight an army from the Carolingian Empire, the Roman Empire, the Assyrians, or the horsemen of Attila the Hun or Genghis Khan, well, I don't think a single Uruk-hai would make it out of there alive. And if any of those armies from our world made it to Middle-earth, I don't think it would take long at all before all the goblins and orcs started telling stories about how terrifying those humans are. Maybe if Cyrus the Great was the one to invade Mordor, it might have been Sauron locked up in his tower mumbling to himself, how could it have come to this? But that, of course, is just my opinion. Do the humans of Middle-earth and other fantasy realms feel like humans to you? Would the medieval and ancient nations of our world be better prepared against orcs and goblins? Is there some obscure piece of lore related to Eru Iluvatar that completely invalidates everything I've just said? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, this has been a Templin Dispatch.